My son is a very determined person. He's very disciplined. He's very responsible.
He joined the ROTC since his freshman year, and he's so dedicated into putting his time and disciplined. I mean, being there at 6:30 in the morning, coming home when it was already dark. Every day that was his schedule.
It was a Sunday afternoon, and I drove him and his friends to the movies, and he mentioned to me that they were gonna go get something to eat before the movie started. And I told him, no problem, go ahead, son. I came back home and picked up my wife, and we were gonna go eat lunch.
We had just sat down. We were barely gonna place our order when my phone rang, and it was his friend that was with him that day. And he told me that Adrian had an accident, and right away I asked what happened. He said, oh, he fell.
We were walking behind a little shopping plaza, and we went up a ramp, not knowing on the other side of the wall it was about a 12 to 15 foot drop.
You could just hear his voice just for like a split second. You could hear him like just screaming, and once I heard him fall, I looked over, and I didn't see him moving, and I was like, oh God, this is not good.
When I got off the car and saw the wall, how high it was like that's when it hit me. I mean, I just saw him on the floor. The ambulance was already there. They were putting him on a stretcher. I was about to go into a panic when my husband told me, calm down, calm down.
They put me on the stretcher, and they put me in the ambulance, and the last thing I remember was asking, where's my mom? And she replied to me, and I can't remember what happened after that.
He was transported to UMC, to the trauma center there. And then he started feeling dizzy, and he was throwing up. He wanted to throw up, and that's when the nurses started getting very concerned, and they rushed him to get an MRI. They came back out, and they told me he was bleeding from his brain.
Did he have the skull fractures and the bleeding to both sides of his brain? But we were worried that this was going to bring on a cascade of swelling associated with this head injury.
When Dr. Trier came out, he told us exactly what happened and what he had to do. How he tried for us to understand is that he had cracked his skull like an egg.
This set of images represents Adrian's CAT scan when he arrived. Associated with this bleeding then has been skull fractures that has extended, and it goes right over the top of his head and down the other side.
I don't know, I just broke down.
Adrian had fractured his clavicle and his sternum. His skull was cracked from left to right. Immediate surgery on Adrian's brain was required to stop bleeding and avoid swelling.
Dr. Trier came out. He himself took us to where my son was at, because by that time they had already, I guess behind the scenes, they had already taken him to the ICU of the Children's Hospital. I couldn't believe it. Just hours ago I was talking to him.
During the surgery, Dr. Trier placed a monitor on Adrian's head to track the pressure of his brain.
The day after he arrived here, then that intracranial pressure started creeping up into the abnormal range. And at that time we made a decision to take him back to the operating room on an urgent basis.
Less than 24 hours later, Adrian went through his second head surgery. This time, a piece of his skull had to be removed to allow the brain to swell. This piece of bone was then placed in his abdomen to preserve it for later reimplantation. Adrian was put into an induced coma and remained under the care of the pediatric intensive care unit at El Paso Children's Hospital.
Keeping somebody under sedation for that amount of time is actually quite challenging. It has some problems, and specifically also for the family, it's a lot of waiting.
Dr. Saenz is a very good man. He's a very smart man. He's a very caring person. I remember Dr. Saenz, every morning he went in, he would make sure my son was getting what he needed.
After 7 days under sedation, doctors decided it was time to wake him up.
And the first thing he said was, "Mom." He whispered, "Mom," when he saw his mom walk in the room. And when I got close to him, he told me, "I love you, Dad." He whispered because he couldn't speak, right? He had a breathing tube in his, and I told him I loved him too. And it was a very good time.
I thank God for putting Dr. Trier and Dr. Science at that moment when he needed them. I don't know if anybody else would have been there or what would have happened. I just thank God that they were there because he needed them.
Adrian spent another week in El Paso Children's Hospital receiving rehabilitation. A few weeks later, there was yet one more surgery to put the piece of skull back in place.
And I had to wear a protective helmet whenever I walked, just in case I fell, just in case something hit me. So in December, the last surgery I had was just to put the bone back in my skull and reconstruct it, so using screws and plates to hold my skull back together until it fully grows.
Now, Adrian's back in school. He's at the top of his class and has a bright future.
So now I only go to school from 7:30 to 12:15. From 1 to 5 I go to work, and I work for the school district for the Fine Arts Department. I'm gonna go to UTEP here, the University of Texas at El Paso, get my bachelor's degree in biology before I go to medical school myself. I want to be a doctor, I want to a primary physician. I want to provide people with that comfort and security that I was provided. The care I received in El Paso Children's Hospital is just amazing. The nurses and doctors all made me feel like if I was going to be okay. Like, they provided that sense of comfort and security.
If it wasn't for that hospital and the care and the nurses that were there, my son might not be here.
I'm thrilled to death to be working with such amazing physicians at these two institutions, and I hope that you all can come and visit and see the kind of things that we continue to do with the foundation at UMC and El Paso Children's Hospital.
So the pediatric trauma program, it's the only pediatric trauma program, level 1 trauma center in the surrounding community, all the way up to Albuquerque or Tucson, or in Texas all the way to San Antonio. It's truly a multidisciplinary approach, from the trauma services to the trauma surgical services, trauma neurosurgical services, pediatric ICU, pediatric pharmacist, pediatric ICU nursing, pediatric ICU respiratory therapist, child life, and everybody coming together and working as a team to provide one single common mission, which is to best provide the care for these particular children.
Children's Miracle Network funds have purchased equipment for El Paso Children's Hospital that were critical in saving Adrian's life. These doctors and nurses could not provide the care that our kids deserve without your generosity, without your support. So every time you ask, will you donate $1 to Children's Miracle Network? Think of the many lives you'll save with that simple question. Thank you.